Hello, everyone. Welcome to Human Capital Growth webinar on the digitization of the learning and development function. Welcome to all of you who've joined us today. We have viewers from Canada, Kyrgyzstan, India, UAE, and the United States. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to those of you in the different time zones. I am Shreya Sarkar-Barney, President and Founder of Human Capital Growth, and I will be facilitating today's session. For those of you who are new to Human Capital Growth, there are two areas that we work in: leadership development as well as talent management systems. Our mission is to help organizations achieve better outcomes using science-based evidence, analytics, as well as empathy. And you can see some of the companies that we have worked with and have the privilege of continuing to work with. I thought for today's session, it might be helpful to provide a little bit of background on our experience with digital learning and the topic of today's webinar. My background is as an industrial organizational psychologist, and I'm a former tenure track professor. So teaching and learning has been a big part of my career journey. It also was the focus of my research when I was a professor. So that dates back to more than 15 years ago. Now, along the way, I've also had careers in the business world where I've deployed e-learning systems around the world. I've used platforms such as Blackboard, Canvas, Sakai, Moodle to deploy e-learning solutions, or actually taught at universities using these platforms. And at Human Capital Growth, our journey with digital learning began about almost 6 years ago when we started building our learning platform, and have learned a lot along the way, which we will share in our session, as well as hope that you can avoid some of the mistakes that we made. Thankfully, we feel like we are in a place where we can make distance learning, digital learning, e-learning, whatever you want to call it, make it work. And so we'll provide some guidance for those of you who are in this journey or starting this journey. Please feel free to text in your questions in the chat box. I'll be taking a few questions along the way, but we'll have time toward the end for a dialogue. For those of you who are new to this Zoom web conferencing platform, I want to share that there's a few simple controls that you can use. Now, all participants are in mute mode, so to ask a question, please use either the chat box. If you have a technical problem, you can speak to our technical support by texting in your question. If you want to adjust your audio settings, you'll find the audio settings button, and hopefully you're able to hear me clearly. If you would like to ask a question, either by texting or by voice, please use the raise hand button, and I can promote you up to a panelist so you can ask a question by voice. Again, we'll open up the discussion portion towards the end of the webinar, but please do text in your questions in the chat box. And for those of you who joined us today for HRCI recertification credits or HCG recertification credits, please do make sure that you're joining with your full name so we can send you your certificates. So moving on to the webinar, I'd like to start with our very first poll. I know that many of you were very kind to tell us a little bit about where you are in your journey in the digital learning space. And one of the things that we've learned is that about half of you who are joining us today have already begun your journey and are quite a bit ahead in terms of deploying digitization in your L&D function. So my question to you today, as I open up our very first poll, is what brings you to this webinar? Are you looking for guidance in specific areas? Are you looking for new ideas, or is it out of general interest that you decided to join? So please do enter your responses here, and if it is a specific area that you're looking for guidance on, would you please also text in your the area that you're working on and are challenged with or want to explore further. We'd love to hear from you. And I see a question here. I'll give you just another minute to enter your responses here. How can I tell if my full name appears? So Annika, I do see your name, so I know that your name is registered in our system or in the Zoom platform. All right, so I think if we've heard from several of you. I know that many of you are still probably just getting started. So I'll give you just a couple more seconds to vote before I close the polling. I know that not everyone today has voted, so please do if you can. We'd love to hear from all of you. And if you did mention a specific area or even general interest, it would be great if you can tell us what those areas are, and I will do my best to address those as I go into today's presentation. So what we see is that about 2/3 of you are here today more out of general interest in this topic, and I'm sure that you'll find some value in our conversation in this presentation today. So that's actually about a third of all of you here for general interest. All right, so let's move on to the next portion. In terms of what we will cover today, it's really three key areas that anyone who is either starting the journey or in their journey should be asking is, when is digital learning the right solution? What do you digitize? And we see a variety of practices there, and we'll share what we have learned. And finally, we'll talk about how do you digitize, and what we'll provide is some specific examples of how we've activated different elements of what drives learning outcomes into our digital learning platform. So because today's session is short, I'll talk about them more descriptively, but if anyone's interested, we are also happy to talk in detail and demonstrate what we've done within our system. And finally, I will end with some skills that we have found to be very, very helpful for embracing this digital learning journey, and I'll talk about that as well. So moving on to our next portion, I'd like to spend just a couple minutes defining what is digital learning, and more importantly, what is learning? Because there's a lot of, again, different practices that we see. What we want to do is really use the psychologist's perspective in terms of what is learning, and so that gives you an idea, are you achieving or not? In terms of digital learning, this is a fairly common definition that we have embraced, which is it's any technology mediated learning that provides learners control over when and where they learn. So the ability to pace the learning, decide when one is going to learn and what they want to focus on and how much time they want to focus on is really one of the added benefits of digitizing the learning function, and not to mention all the benefits to administrators, etc., which I'll talk about. Now, there's a variety of different names that are used to refer to the digitization of learning. Online learning, mobile learning, so on and so forth. So you can go through those lists. So we're really going to talk about all of these different practices under the umbrella of digital learning. Next, let me talk about learning. A lot of times companies talk about training. We find that the definition of learning is a little bit more useful in terms of understanding what should be the outcome of a training intervention. So learning, as psychologists describe it, refers to a relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of practice. And there's two key words here that I'd like you to pay attention to, which is change in behavior, which could be things that you can see and things that happen within our minds, as well as it's a result of practice that tells you what should be the process that results in learning. And when it comes to how do you know if someone has learned, that's also something that educational psychologists, organizational psychologists have studied in great detail. For anyone interested, I'd refer you to Krager, Ford, and Salas's article. I believe the reference for that is 1998, but or maybe later than that. But please, if you're interested, I'm happy to share that reference with you. But essentially what we have learned is when someone has engaged in a training activity and if it results in learning, that outcome is visible in three different ways. Is there change in their knowledge? Is there change in their skill, which is something that they can do? Is there change in their attitude? Meaning, are they feeling confident to then use that skill? And self-efficacy has been found to be a very significant predictor of learning outcomes. So just to give you an overview, what should really be changing if, whether using digitization or not, these should be the outcomes you should see if you're engaged in any kind of a learning activity. What are the benefits of digital learning? Clearly, there's lots of benefits to learners, which is why it has become popular. There's greater opportunities to personalize learning, even in large groups of learners. It is pervasive. On-demand learning, learners can come into the learning situation at any time, no matter where they're based. The third part is it's searchable and also allows for distribution of high quality instructions. One doesn't have to just rely on the local instructors. For the instructor as well, there's many benefits. Most importantly, it's the ability to very quickly understand who needs help where and help your learners get to the next level. That's the biggest benefit. And for administrators, historically, a lot of time related to the administration of training was spent on registering people, tracking who has participated, and just things that have not all been automated, so more time can be spent in just making sure that people who need support for learning get that support. So it's been a huge bet. There's many benefits to digitizing learning. I'm going to talk about the parts that touch the learner, but in terms of the administration in our own practice, we find that digitization efforts just help us do a whole lot more with very little resources and really get the right kind of attention to the right participant. I do want to take just a minute to talk about the value chain of learning. Many organizations have embraced digital learning because it does end up saving a lot of resources and give you a large reach. However, we find that if you just think about deploying digital learning, that's only a partial solution. The real benefit from digitizing your entire L&D function is access to learning analytics, which allows for a more evidence-based practice, which can ultimately lead to closing the skill gaps and enhancing expertise within your organization. So combining the three and ensuring that those three things are in place is very important to drive the learning outcome. It's not just sufficient to use technology. And I'll talk about particularly the evidence piece a little bit more later on in this webinar. So I'll go on to the specific agenda items that I had laid out. The first one, let's talk about when is digital learning the right solution? And getting this part right is very important within organizations, so you're able to devote the right resources in the right place. And I'll specifically talk about three key areas, which is the difference between talent development versus human capital development, versus understanding what one can't do versus won't do. And these distinctions will help you make better choices of when to digitize and not to digitize a learning solution. So I get this is when we launch our second poll now, and we'd love to hear from you a little bit more before I share more information. What portion of the L&D offerings at your organization are digitized? And this will give us a good sense of, are you looking to digitize all of your learning efforts? And also help you think about, well, is there a better way to segment when you digitize? So we're seeing the responses come in, and please do chime in. It's very helpful for us then to customize the conversation. So we really appreciate you entering your responses. And I know about half of you have voted. So I'd love to hear from the others. And I know many of you are probably in your morning commute and can't access the poll and fully understand that. So if you're listening in on the telephones as well, that's fine. I'm going to end the polling right now. We do see a clear majority here, and we see a lot of variation in the practice. So let me share the results. But 25% of you said that you actually have not digitized your L&D offerings, and in some organizations, that actually may not be a bad choice. Again, depending on who you are servicing. About half of you have said that 20% of your learning is digitized, and then another quarter of our viewers have said that about 50% is digitized. And I think that what this is showing is you are making some choices about when to digitize or not. So let me move on. I think we might have another follow-up question here. So I'm going to launch another poll to ask you one more question, and I promise I'll move on after that. So which of these is the biggest barrier to your organization's learning digitization effort? Is it lack of senior leader sponsorship, lack of funds, lack of skills, not seen as a priority, or something other? And if it is something other, we always love to hear from you. So if you want to chat in the chat box and tell us what that could be, then that would give us some additional insights. So I see that some of you are voting in. So we'd love to hear from you again. If you get a chance, please do tell us what you think. And a lot of you are telling us something other. So, please do tell us what the other reasons are. That's always very helpful to understand. So I am going to end the polling here. And what we see is there's other reasons that serve as barriers to learning digitization. Some of it is a skill issue. Others is it's not seen as a priority. And priority is an interesting thing. It depends on what else is going on in the organization for us to know, to make a judgment about that. But it's good to see that there is, different types of situations that people are dealing with. I'm sorry, I forgot to share the results here, so all of you can see the results as well. All right, I'm going to move on to the next portion. So to answer whether or not one should digitize, here is a list of questions that we find to be quite helpful. One is, who needs to learn, and what skills need to be developed? Does the learning content lend itself to digitization, or maybe it's not even a worthwhile investment? And what is the highest proficiency level that is required, and can that be achieved through digital learning? This is a place that we see is often not explored and results in inefficient deployment of learning resources. The fifth question is, what is the optimal size of the learner base to even consider the digitization of even a specific course or a curriculum? How large does it have to be for you to get the cost benefit from that investment? And that is really a huge decision And it all depends on whether you have in-house expertise, you have to outsource it, or you have to buy the expertise, as well as the technology and other resources. One thing I will tell you is as time goes by, it is definitely becoming a lot more affordable to digitize learning. The technology is definitely becoming a lot more, it's easier to afford as well as easy to use. So let me provide a couple different frame of references to answer these questions in terms of how do you know if a skill is right for digitization or not. So next I'm going to provide a framework for thinking about skill development in general. One of the things that we find very helpful is to think about, well, where is the need and how can that need be fulfilled? A lot of learning in organizations these days are really more micro needs in terms of how to do something. How do I create pivot tables in Excel? How do I insert a video into a PowerPoint? Things that people need in their everyday work. And just really short YouTube style videos are becoming really, really popular. How do I learn something new? And people are going to, all kinds of e-learning courses. We have our own set in talent management. There's Udemy, Coursera, all kinds of options that are available online where you can learn a little bit of a deeper skill than just how to. And then there is this question of growing skills to a level that is much deeper, where one feels like I can actually do something. I can build macros in Excel, which takes a bit of time to learn. And then gaining skills to a point where you can transform something, do something at a certain level of expertise, that requires much deeper investments. So the difference here that I'm referencing is the difference between talent development and human capital development. Now, for those of you interested, we went a little bit deeper into this topic in one of our previous webinars on learning analytics. I'll talk briefly about the difference between these two, which will help you determine when to digitize. Now, talent development, we refer to this as the development of an individual's skill or capability. Human capital development, on the other hand, is building the collective capacity of an organization. And oftentimes this distinction is not made within the L&D function. Anytime a need is brought in, it's often treated as a talent development need, which is to build the capacity of an individual. And for those types of needs, things on the left-hand side of this table are usually most useful, can be easily deployed, can be digitized. And this probably is about 80% of the requests that you get. Now, on the other hand, human capital development refers to the business-related needs of the organization. And detecting this is part of it's an art and a science. And once you detect it, it's really thinking about how can we bring the right group of people to utilize the skills in a way that's directly related to helping them do things at a level that drives important business outcomes. So let me give you some examples over here of specifically what kinds of training fits into these categories. So talent development needs are probably the vast majority of needs that most organizations get, which is developing software skills, technology skills, accounting skills. These are usually more generic. One of the things that we do recommend to our clients is instead of trying to build these kinds of curriculum internally, it is best to rent, buy, see what is available in the marketplace, and really focus more on human capital development, because that is what creates competitive advantage for organizations. Human capital development, as I mentioned, builds the collective capacity of individuals in the organization. And so The kinds of development that fall in this category are things like the company's go-to-market strategy, product development methodology, solution selling, understanding what the unique needs of your customer base are. These are things that are very, very unique to the organization. This is where most of L&D should invest their time and effort. And also, these are the types of solutions we feel benefit from the adoption of technology, adoption of digital learning, but also requires more of a blended format. Talent development, digital learning makes a lot of sense. But the more you get to human capital development, which creates the secret sauce of your organizations, provide competitive advantage, that's where a blended solution, or sometimes, not even using technology, but bringing people together in a room and talking through creating deep mental models about how the company should operate is what delivers the best solution, the best learning outcome. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type in. So I thought that we should take an example of something that's happening in the industry today and see if there's a way we could utilize, when is digital learning the right solution? So many of you have probably heard what is happening at Uber, the culture problem that they're trying to fix. And this particular recommendation caught my eye last week. Former Attorney General Eric Holder and his company was appointed to look into the culture problem at Uber, which was interesting by itself. But one of the recommendations that came out, and was a pretty lengthy recommendation for anyone who's interested, you can actually read the report and see what was recommended. And specifically, it was around training leaders, managers, and HR to combat implicit bias. So I'm curious to hear from you. Do you think that this kind of training will fix Uber's culture problem? So if you do get a chance, please do text in your responses. I'm curious to hear, because this is a good example. Yes, you could use digital learning and address the need. You could probably also bring people into a training room and address the need. Unfortunately, I'm going to give away the answer now. Research shows that implicit bias training to address diversity actually has very little impact. So this recommendation, unfortunately, is not grounded in rigorous evidence, and therefore brings into question, will it really help Uber address some of the bigger challenges that they have? Next, I want to provide another framework. So to answer this question that I asked you, will Uber be able to fix the challenges, the culture problem challenges that they're facing in the organization? I think to answer that question, we have to go back to the evidence, and I'm not actually going back to the implicit bias evidence, but broadly, how do we know when is training a right solution? So one of the things that we have learned from years and years of research on human behavior, human performance in the workplace, is that can't do problems can be addressed through training. And I want to emphasize they can be addressed by training. So anything that is skill-based that you can go to school to learn, like finance skills, accounting skills, technology skills, all of those have a huge cognitive ability requirement predominantly, and can be fixed using training. What things that a person won't do, which are primarily determined by factors such as their interest, their motivation, their personality, their culture fit with the organization, those are very hard to fix through training. And whether you choose to digitize or not, this broad framework will help you understand, well, when is training going to be the right solution? And I have to tell you, when I was internal in the organization, I can't tell you how many times a senior leader would send a request down to us, say, can't this problem be fixed through training? Training is often seen as a panacea to all of the people problems in organizations. And it's very, very important to consult with the leadership to help them understand what can and cannot be fixed. And getting recommendations such as those in Eric Holder's report don't help very much. While training can help, but fixing a culture problem is a much, much bigger problem. Has to do with the leadership, has to do with practices and norms that have been established over a period of time that have to be unwritten for people to see that the organization is truly changing, and that goes beyond training. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next section, and before we do that, I would like to hear from you next again. And this is a question related, similar to the last one, but the question is, which of these is the primary cause of poor return on L&D investment? So we're not talking about barriers to deploying digital learning, but a broader question of what gets in the way of allowing an organization to see the benefits of the training that they're offering their people. Because on one hand, it is the choices you're making about when to digitize learning, when is training even the right solution. And on the other hand, once you've determined to deploy training, then what else could get in the way of achieving results? And I want to end the poll here and see what some of you have shared with us. So there's two different options that we're seeing. One is, half of you believe that it's lackluster instructional quality, so your instructional design is not good, or the people delivering the training are not very good, or all of the above. All of the above is an easier answer, and I'm going to tell you what, it's actually, the responses they provided here are somewhat in the right direction, but actually it's none of the above. The answer based on prior evidence is that it's actually something else that's getting in the way of driving your L&D outcomes. So anyone wants to guess what that may be before I change the slide? All right. So if you can see my screen here, this probably gives you a guess or a hint of what is the bigger problem. What studies show is that people's inertia to do something or to do nothing is one of the biggest problems that you have to overcome to drive the returns of your L&D investment. In fact, one of the biggest predictor of whether or not one will learn and utilize their new skills in the workplace is motivation to learn. It explains about a third of the variance in learning outcomes, which is a pretty large. So think about it. If you're able to convince your participants that learning the skill will make a difference to the way they perform their job, the outcomes that they're able to achieve, you have fought about a third of the battle in terms of achieving your outcomes. And this is often one of the most ignored parts of deploying any kind of learning solution. And I bring this up because particularly when you digitize learning, it is something that you have to focus on even more, because digitization provides greater learner control, meaning they have to decide, your learners have to decide when and where and how much of their effort they will invest in learning. And if you don't get this motivation part right, which is what we found in our very early journey, where we were achieving only about, say, 20% of our participants were completing our programs, which is our e-learning programs. We learned that if we didn't get this part right, the rest of the investments didn't matter. Didn't matter how good your instructional design was, etc. So next I want to talk about what do you digitize when you think about digitizing your learning efforts. And there's a lot of content here. So we use this skill assurance model as a framework to think about what are all the elements that should be activated in order to drive learning. And for in our case, particularly when we do more organization-wide training programs, learning programs. They have a human capital development component, and we've come to the realization that a blended approach is the best approach. Without going into the details, what I want to talk about is that when we think about learning, most organizations immediately focus in on the learning component of this value chain. So how do we deploy training? What is the content? They spend hours and hours trying to find the right content. And this is where I said, if your focus is on talent development, this is what you could very, very easily get access to. Instead, a better place is to focus on what would create the motivation to drive learning outcomes. And that's why we find a blended approach in our case has worked very well. So the beauty of using digitization is that you can go beyond just the learning event, which is typically what happens in a workshop-based setting, by incorporating many of these other elements. First, it could be starting with a reflection of why is this skill even important to me? And that's what creates relevance and criticality. Things that we found in our early research that we did with Knowledge Advisors, a company that many of you may be familiar with, who produced Metrics That Matters technology, that knowing what is critical and relevant reduces scrap learning. And so that reflection piece activates it. And we do it through surveys. The other ways that we've done it is by having senior leaders involved in launch events that describes why a certain skill is important for that organization. This is particularly when we do cohorts. We encourage the organization to not just treat the learning as a standalone activity, but link it to other things happening in the organization that is related to the learners. The other most important part of completing the learning journey is, are you providing opportunities for practice? Are you providing feedback? Is there opportunity to demonstrate achievement and to celebrate? So many of you may have heard the terminology of challenge and achievement. Is challenge and achievement built into your learning framework? And the beauty of digitization is all of this could be done very, very easily. You can see some of the elements that are listed below of how we do it. I want to talk about one particular piece, feedback. The beauty of using digital technologies is you can provide automated feedback for a lot of the things, whether a person gets a response right or wrong. If you have a simulation-based training, it's very, very easy to provide feedback. However, in our experience, we have found that when there is a human involved in the process, somehow that generates a higher level of motivation. So one of the things that our process includes is not just automated feedback and multiple choice quizzes, which are easy to create and deploy, but they actually require learners to do something, to do a project for every topic they learn about. These are assignments. And these are actually graded by human mentors, by graders, who then provide feedback. So there's actually a name and a face that our learners associate with. And we found that including this process into our system, which we didn't have in the early days, drove learning up higher and higher. And at this point, our success rates, the highest that we've achieved was 84% completion rate in a large cohort of 50 participants. Success rates in terms of learning achievements greater than 70%. It's by adding the practice and feedback element that we're able to drive not just learning completion, which would be what you would focus on if you were only focused on learning, but also by adding practice and feedback, we're able to increase the achievement rates of our learners. The next piece that I want to talk about, again, very quickly in the interest of time, is when we think about learning, the what. So I talked about the what elements, which is focus on reflection, learning, practice, feedback, and celebration. The next is how do you actually digitize it? Well, everything that I'm describing, you can also do it even if it is manually administered. It just takes a lot of time. Digitization, the benefit of it is it's very easy to deploy across hundreds of learners. It does require some development time, but gives you a longer runway in terms of what you can do once it's digitized. So definitely, when it's the right solution, we'd recommend making the investments. And to describe how you would do it, I'm going to contrast the traditional approach with the digital approach. When it comes to content, the traditional method would be you would have static content that instructor would take into a classroom, usually generated just by the instructor. The challenge here is keeping that content up to date. A lot of those challenges are addressed when you digitize learning. First of all, what digitization allows you to do, again, as I said, there's lots and lots of content that's available in the marketplace that are designed by experts who are not just developing content, but doing work in that space. So using that content becomes really easy. The benefits of digitization is that it makes the content shareable, searchable, dynamic, also user generated. So for example, if you are, let's say, taking an Excel training and you pull together a few YouTube videos that have some of the most common types of needs that come up in your organization. Now let's say you create links in your learning platform and say, here's 5 great YouTube videos that you should be watching. You've curated that content. And then you allow your users to comment on what worked, what didn't work, and what else they would like to see. And that helps create new content that is very, very much targeted towards your learners. And then these can be indexed and again, make it easily searchable. So in the green boxes at the bottom, you'll find that the way we have come to make content more and more focused on what the learners need is, first of all, we use form compliant e-learning courses, but also for us, we allow our users to recommend content. And that's where we use the blended learning format, where a lot of our content is also delivered through webinars, which are only for the participants based on content that they have suggested. The other piece is we utilize our assessments. Our assessments are content valid as well as criterion valid, meaning we generate the assessment content based on the learning curriculum, and then we look at who is doing well versus not so well in the assessments and the quizzes. For the ones who are doing well, we look at what is it that they missed. And that is another way for us to very statistically and very quickly get to what content is still very, very challenging for our learners. So for example, in our previous cohort of learners in our learning talent management certification program, we found that many of them who are taking our courses on organizational effectiveness actually struggle to connect individual level outcomes of an effort with the organizational level outcomes. And we could see that by the pattern of responses that they pick, and that allowed us to design better learning. And there's lots of, this is a game of detail, and there's lots and lots of details. So I'm just sharing high level how to think about your content. The next piece that I want to talk about is the learner experience, and this is a huge part. Many in the field also think about this as learner engagement, but thinking about the learner's experience is very important. In the old world, the traditional world, most of learner experience was centered around what the instructor creates, usually synchronous and designed for people who are co-located. The beauty of digital learning is you can allow your learners to drive what that experience is going to be for them by having lots and lots of different ways of engaging and giving them options. So your learners have the ability to choose. And here again, you can see in our platform, we use a number of different ways for learners to to engage by providing structured responses versus unstructured responses. Structured responses is where they're engaging, where they're either taking a quiz, filling out a survey. It's fast and quick and gives us immediate feedback about what they're learning. And then unstructured, which leads to deeper learning, deeper reflection on the content, are things like discussion forums, wikis, feedback sessions, office hours with the mentors, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole host of things that we have learned along the way that providing multiple options to engage different kinds of learners again becomes very easy once you digitize. And every one of the things that are listed in the boxes, it by itself could be the topic of a webinar on how do you do it right. And then the final piece that I want to talk about in terms of what do you really digitize and how you digitize is the data, the type of data. And this is another huge benefit of digitization. It's what allows the administrator to focus in on where attention is required. In the traditional approach, the data that was typically collected is on the number of seats that are filled in the training program, the attendance, and then maybe a small sheet of what people like, dislike. When you digitize learning, everything that your participants do in your learning platform, whether it's online and in today's world, even offline, could be tracked using XAPI or TinCan. These kind of digitization efforts provide a tremendous amount of data. The challenge is what you do with the data. And your data could be sitting in the logs and grade books and quiz reports and surveys, and being able to analyze all of those and create user stories and be able to track who needs help. So we think of data in terms of two big categories. Participation, are they continuing with their learning? How frequently are they joining? What kind of activities have they completed? What's left to do? So that helps us in terms of nudging our participants to continue with their learning, engaging our client partners to also promote the learning. And then on the performance side, we track what is it that they're learning, where are they struggling, just like I mentioned, and use that to follow up, provide follow-up support in the blended sessions. So next I want to talk about the skills that are required to drive this kind of digitization effort. There's just really a lot of detail here, but I'll talk about a few skills that we have found to be very helpful when you think about digitizing learning. So let's start with what is the ultimate goal of the L&D function? And this is the thing that you have to keep front and center, whether you digitize or not. And the way we look at it is to ensure that the organization has the right skills at the right place at the right time. So it's really ultimately the outcome is, can people do things that they couldn't do in the past that is directly aligned with what the organization needs? And if you've delivered that, then you've achieved your outcomes. So there's a handful of things that we find to be extremely useful to deliver this kind of learning outcomes for our organizations. First is the technology, and I would say that this is rank-ordered somewhat in terms of criticality, higher the number, higher the criticality. So technology, design, learning principles, assessment, measurement, analytics, and consulting. Let me go over those quickly. In terms of technology, learning management systems have evolved quite a bit. About 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, companies were investing in learning management systems. It took a lot of resources, and more often than not, it really was used to host content and to track who's training, who's not training. Some of my early efforts in deploying e-learning was in this space. More and more organizations are learning that what is important is filling a need. When there's a need for a skill, it may or may not reside in your learning management system. It could be a MOOC, it could be open source, it could be anywhere. Being able to use technology and bring that right skill development need to the right person is the most important part. If you're developing e-learning courses or some technology-led courses in-house, then it's useful to have at least a few of your resources know how to use authoring tools. The most popular ones are Adobe Captivate or Articulate, and there are many others. There are also some very easy to use open source tools, but it could be as simple as putting a PowerPoint together and hosting it online. That could be also another approach to deploying your learning. And then if you want to get fancy, knowing video and audio editing is also very helpful to build good e-learning courses. But at the end of the day, this is helpful, but if you don't do the other parts, it sort of is only marginally useful. So I talked about design, and instructional design skills are important. Knowing how people learn and being able to design your learning in a way that people learn is helpful. Again, it definitely creates for a better learner experience. But I have to tell you, my bias is that if people really desperately have the need to learn something, and you give them instructions on a sheet of paper, a simple learning tool as just a set of instructions on a sheet of paper could drive great learning outcomes. So it's not always great instructional design that's required to drive learning outcomes. And I truly believe in this. I think it's creating the relevance and criticality, or at least that's what our data shows. So graphic design skills, visual design, all of this make for a pleasant learner experience when you're able to embed all of this. So it's not just text. And that is our very first learning design about 7 years ago was mostly text-based learning, and we found that the industry was moving on. They wanted videos, they wanted graphics, and the key to deploying training globally is to also consider, bandwidth implications. People around the world don't all have access to high bandwidth internet, and so some of those considerations come into play here, and there's a lot of trial and error through which we've learned what works. Then the final piece, I will talk about this learning principles part, and here what is important is to make sure that you are incorporating how people learn, and not just the learning event, but think about what to do before you begin your learning activity, during, and after. And there's lots and lots of things. Again, we've covered this in some of our previous webinars. Thinking about transfer of training is extremely important. So a lot of times we find that L&D professionals are very, very focused on just training and development. And we find that that could be limiting. And that's why we focus on managing the employee life cycle. Employees need to learn at different points in time. Either it could be when they're onboarding, when they're learning a new skill, when they're looking to advance higher up in the organization, when there is a change in the organization. So having a more comprehensive perspective definitely allows for driving better learning outcomes. And the two final pieces I'll talk about is measurement and analytics helps take the outcomes to a higher level faster. When you're relying on data, relying on assessments, and not just going by anecdotes in terms of who has learned and not learned, you're able to really deliver much more reliable outcomes. And as an HR profession, I think there is an understanding that this is the direction we all need to head. It's not just fields right, but show me where is it right and who needs help, and being open to the idea that not all of your training is going to work. And again, there's lots of detail here, so I'm not going to go into the depths of it. Again, I'll refer you to our talent analytics webinar that we did a few months ago that talks about how you even think about analytics when it comes to talent development. And the final piece I want to talk about is the importance of the consulting piece. And this is often overlooked. To drive learning outcomes, you have to create the business case, the criticality, the relevance, engage more than just your learner. Often a missed opportunity, influence and persuade them of what their role should be in the learning process. And then there's good project planning, communication skills, leadership skills. So we truly believe that as a field, it's important to not just think about learning and development, but think about talent development, think about human capital development, broaden that umbrella, and then overlaying digital learning on it will give you power where you need it the most. So I'm going to end our webinar part, the presentation part over here, and open up the last few minutes. I'll take some questions, and also happy to stay longer if you would like to chat. If anyone has questions that you would like to ask by voice, feel free to raise your hand and I'll promote you up to participant. All right. Well, while we wait for you to text in your answers or ask a question, let me just share one other thing. We actually are very interested in hearing from you in terms of where should we focus our future webinars. So we'll be taking a couple months off in the summer. We won't be having a webinar in the month of July and August. But we'd like to hear from you what topics are of most importance so we can make sure that we build this into our future plans. So if you could just take a minute to let us know what topics are most important to you based on what you're working on, what's important to your organization. These are all topics that we're currently working on projects, so we'll be happy to share our insights. As a diversity and inclusion, leadership development, manager development, managing virtual teams, someone just responded, employee engagement, performance management, talent acquisition. Which of these is of value to you? All right, so we've seen some responses for managing virtual teams. Interestingly, the human capital growth team is spread across 2 different continents, and in the last 8 years, we've really had to perfect how we work as a virtual team. Most of our team is actually not co-located, so it's something that we live and breathe every day, and looks like there's a lot of interest on that topic, and also leadership development. So if you haven't voted, please do share your insights with us, and we'd love to bring another webinar that will be of use to you. Okay, I'll end the poll over here, and we'll move on. So, you know, the biggest, what we're seeing over here is managing virtual teams and leadership development clearly tops the list, but there's also interest in some of the other topics, which is good for us to know. All right, and so before we move on, I know we are right at the hour. What I want to share is human capital growth does work in helping companies digitize the learning. Not all of the learning efforts that we get involved in require digitization, but we as a company have been dealing with or working in this space for more than 7 years now, building e-learning courses that are SORM compliant, AICC compliant, building certification programs custom for company, as well as we have 12 different ones on talent management, building assets. Right now we are actually working on a lot of gamification effort on our own learning platforms, as well as we've done plenty of learning analytics work and redesigned our own learning management system 3 times. So we can help in any of these areas. If any of these are an area of need for your organization or for others that you know, please spread the word. We'd love to be of help. So if there are no other questions, I'm gonna thank you all for being with us today. Please do text in your questions or stay in touch with us and send us your comments. We always love hearing from our participants.